So we're going over in Nevada. By the time we get into Nevada a good distance, the sun is again touching the horizon. And so we have to find a place to camp, and find a place we did, and it was free. That's better. This is supposedly the loneliest highway in America out through. We made a quick stop at Petroglyph Park and looked some of the petroglyphs over. There wasn't a whole lot, but there's some fairly decent stuff here, so we enjoyed it. There's a trail that the park has built that goes around the area where the petroglyphs are, and even a jackrabbit sneaks away ahead. The jackrabbit poses a moment in between the sagebrush and the juniper and pinyon pine. We find a few more petroglyphs scratched deeply into the cliff walls as we take the trail around. Every now and then you'll see a nice petroglyph. And they're pretty much protected here at this park, so the vandalism isn't terribly bad on them. These kind of petroglyphs are totally different than most of them we see up north, so I'm not sure what the Stone Age artist had in mind when he made these, but they're nice, and that's great to see something like this. Then our paved road turns to a dirt and gravel road as we head out to a hot springs called Spencer Hot Springs. We arrive there and find the pool immediately. Volunteers have built a rock-lined pool that's very nice, and then they pipe the hot water in, and you can cool it or warm it however you might like. And the sunsets are nothing but spectacular out in the desert. That night, when we went to bed, we could hear the burros galloping around and braying a lot at night. We didn't see any that night, but then the next day we went for a ride with some people we met at the hot springs, and we went by, and there they were, the burros just as big as could be. We made a trip out to another petroglyph site, only these petroglyphs are in a cave, and there's about a third of a mile hike to them. Usually they try to make it where there's a hike to the petroglyphs, because the people that are going to do the vandalism usually aren't willing to hike. So that's okay as long as it preserves them. And we get to the cave and found a metal grill in front of the petroglyphs. And these aren't the petroglyphs, these are the pictographs. They're painted on with some red ochre and then some of the alkalis. They've made a solution out of them and painted it on so they can. Makes you wonder if the drawers of this rock art realized that it would be here all these centuries later, but it's in a protected area of the cave, so it'll last a long, long time in here. This rock art was very nice. I'm not sure what the Stone Age artist had in mind again, but they did a good. Leonard and Janine were the ones that brought us out here. They've been here many times, so it was really nice of them to invite us along. The people that brought us out here, they're old timers at this desert thing, and they live in Arizona, so it was really nice to get together with them and have a great tour. We go past what looks to be an old homestead house, and there's a big old bull there, guarding and seeing that everything is done right. And some krells in the background. This again is desert range, cow country, and that's a rugged deal, that ranching the desert. We didn't make all this trip out here just to see an old bull. We went to see a hot springs right near the old cabin, and it's a stock water tank with a nice little hot stream and some wild flowers growing along its bank. This, the stream is big enough that they can put pipes in and run the water where you want it in the trough. Then we go to a great big hole. It's a hot springs, and it's called Diana's Punch Bowl. It's really huge. It's over 100 foot across, and it must be 60 feet deep. You can see the rings where it is formed. As we went up to it, a breeze hit Marge, and she lost her hat, and down in it went, and there's no retrieving it. There have been some people that have gone down. There have been some people that have tried to go down in that pool rappelling with ropes, and it has bad air, and they have died. When Marge and I returned to camp, we took a walk and found another hot springs, and cattle troughs are the affair. As soon as we returned to camp, we took a little hike and found another hot springs. This one is, of course, another cattle trough. That's the official hot springs tank. Even a little leopard lizard is out here with his big long tail, and he's catching some insects, keeping the insects down around the hot pools. But by now we've spent a couple days here, and it's time for us to head on up north to Oregon. We arrive at Willow Creek Hot Springs and find the water to be just absolutely excellent. This is one of our favorites of hot springs, and so we're going to spend at least a night here before we head on home. Marge was walking around and found a great basin gopher snake crawling right around our tent, but that's all right. They're non-venomous, and they keep the rodents down. And he's just crawling around looking the place over, and probably he wouldn't turn down a nice fat mouse. He's testing the air for smells and sounds with that forked tongue. He decided to go in to the cover of some grass where he thinks he'll be hid better. Throughout the years, we've always noticed snakes here, and that's a really good. The clouds are building, and it looks like there's going to be a thunderstorm. So Mr. Snake came over and went for a quick dip in the hot springs, and then decided to crawl back in where there's some rocks. I'll bet you he lays there a lot of times, and a lot of people that soak in this hot springs are totally unaware of his presence. He crawled in behind this rock, and then pretty soon I saw his head poke out the other side. He's going on to his special place where he likes to go, and he crawls along the steep bank. He doesn't seem to want to get in that hot springs water, although he did swim in it just a little bit. But it's probably a little too warm for him today, so he crawls through the grass on this hillside, and he's having some trouble staying up there. Whoops, that water's just plain too hot. So he moves back up through the grass and on, but he's very determined to get in his special spot. I guess he thinks that if he gets in there, if a fancy lady comes and is doing too much giggling or something, he can always show himself and she'll sure be on her way. Then he gets to the spot where he goes in his special little den, and that's probably pretty nice when the weather turns off windy and chilly, as it does when there's a thunderstorm threatening, and he can use the warm water of the hot springs and warm himself up really good. He takes a lot of trouble to crawl in his little special den, but then it's all in vain. He forgets to suck his tail in, and if someone were to come, they'd see that tail hanging out, and you can just barely see him back under the rocks in his little den. But that tail, that would be a giveaway. Someone might think there's a snake in there. And I guess when you're to hot springs, what you don't know definitely does. A northern harrier hawk glides along at sagebrush top level, looking for his next meal. And I'll bet that snake's glad he didn't spot him. Who knows, that might make good hot hawk feed. And this hawk usually has some young. They nest right on the ground, and they feed their young for quite some time. And when the young get large enough, they'll fly up, and the adults will drop a mouse or a lizard or maybe even a snake to them, and they'll catch it in midair. I guess that's their schooling, to learn how to hunt. The sun majestically sinks below the horizon as we're still watching for different animals to show up. Oh, and by the way, that snake being in the hot springs, that's classified information only released on a need-to-know basis, and Marge doesn't need. So as the sun majestically dips behind Black Butte, the sunrises aren't that great out at Whitehorse Hot Springs because of the lay of the land, but the sunsets are the greatest you've ever seen. The sun just majestically disappears down behind Black Butte and then down behind the majestic Steens Mountain. And each night is different. You'll never see the same one twice, and the beauty of this land is in the vastness of it. And so this gives you an idea of the vastness of it, and we're kind of insignificant in the vastness of this land. I have been told that this whole area was a giant crater where a very ancient volcano exploded. And as you look around at the lay of it, you can see the rim of the crater all the way around you. And the hot springs is just about in the center of it. Since it's a volcanic area, why don't we go out and see if we can find some sunstones? Marge loves sunstones, and so we go out and scour the floor of the desert. We see where some ants have decorated their hill with tiny sandstones. Then we see a jackrabbit bouncing around on this. He seems to be totally unaware of the sunstones as he bounces around. It looks like he's a little healthier rabbit. I don't see all those ticks on his ears either. It's just that one where I've noticed all the ticks. But wow, he's got a flea that bit hard. And so he'll scratch him and then decide to hide behind the sagebrush as he hops on his way. We decide to stop on the way back after we get done with the rabbit and see the old Pony Express station. This is well worth the stop. It's just the ruins where the old Pony Express station once stood to deliver mail. It was a very short-lived thing, but you can still see the ruins where it was a double rock wall with mud for mortar and mud in between it. And if you stand there silent and just let your mind wander, you can almost hear the gallop of horses, and then the Pony Express rider hurries in. The hawk was flying around all the time we were there, so he can't kid me. He's got a nest on the ground right across from Willow Creek. A little bird hovers on top of rock as I go up to watch the beavers. And I get up there, and those beavers are really busy getting ready for winter. They're going around looking for a willow to cut, and not just any willow will work. He puts a lot of effort into looking. And also they check their dam every single day. They've almost flooded the entire campground here with their ambitiousness, but the BLM hauled a bunch of rock and stuff in, and no one bothered the beaver, so they're free to build their dam and do whatever their little beaver minds tell them would be nice to do. They've created a lot of extra pond water all around the area of Willow Creek, and so cattails are just growing all over, as well as the willows. They just cut what they need, and then they look like a little tugboat. They'll pull these willows over in front of their beaver house and sink them down in the mud, where that'll work as a good refrigerator and keep them from floating to the surface. And then come winter, they don't have to go out and worry about getting eaten by a mountain lion or something. They just go down to the bottom of their pond under the ice and grab a few nice willows. And the beaver houses are really nice, and they build them really good in this area, and of course all the mud and vegetation must keep them pretty warm, and then the beavers in there would keep them warm. The beavers build the pond, and then you build something, and then they'll come. So ducks and geese and all sorts of little Tweety birds show up at the beaver pond, and so it's a beehive of activity along about sunset. More willows are being towed over, and down he goes, and they'll be secured to the bottom. It doesn't take him long to fix them down to the bottom, and so that one will be saved for winter. An old mama duck's got her ducks all in a row, and she's swimming across the beaver pond as well as much other wildlife will do. These beaver, when alarmed, they'll slap their tail on the water real hard. It'll just make a spine-tingling slap on the water, and so it not only warns other beaver, but all the rest of the wildlife in the area can hear that and know it's time to make good their getaway. The beaver activity continues till it gets so dark you can no longer see, and then it probably goes on for a good period of time then. These beaver don't have one lazy bone in their entire body, and time after time this little tugboat makes his trip across the pond carrying a bunch of willows, and he'll take them over and do the usual thing. He'll dive down and bury them in the mud, and then that's where they'll stay till winter. And that's a super good idea. That way he doesn't have to go out and go through the snow and get all cold. He just goes out of his beaver house and there it is. There are acres and acres of cattails around here, but the beavers seem to prefer the willows, although they seem to use the cattails too to build their beaver house and also to reinforce their dam. It's a stick, mud, and vegetation thing, and those dams are pretty waterproof. Down he goes, and that stick is buried for winter. It'll be waiting him when the pond's all froze over. He can just go under the ice. But now it's time for us to leave. The hot springs is steaming in the early morning, and we're out of here as the sun rises.